Morning, everybody. How are you? My name is Phil. I'm the lead pastor here, and I'm here with
Matt Clark, and I'm the family pastor here.
Yeah, now something a little bit different, obviously. Now, if you're here for the first time, we haven't done anything like this. I don't know if we've ever done anything like this. We're going to have kind of a conversation about some of the principles we've been learning in Dangers and Distractions. And it's interesting. This series is really Matt's brainchild. We started talking about doing something like this earlier in the year, something where we would focus on taking a time away from some social media stuff. You had this series planned as part of Building Strong Families. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, we originally started it with Building Strong Families. It just happened to be coinciding with 2020. I don't know if you remember those days when we couldn't. That's what it felt like. And it was dangerous to my ears. It kind of came out as we talked about. Basically, in today's culture, our world, we're constantly bombarded, whether it be social media, TV, advertisements, the binge watching, all that kind of stuff. And so it's all vying for our attention. And while the phone, the screens, games, game consoles and all this stuff is not bad. We're not saying get rid of it. We're just saying let's figure out how to manage it, how to invest wisely and to make sure that we kind of have balance with our personal, mental, physical, and spiritual health. So each week we've been examining the scriptures and to live in intention and balance and discernment. So the first week we hit the battle of our gaze, looking at what our attention goes to. Then we hit beyond the mirror, about comparisons, and then redeeming the clock, being wise with our time. And of course today is the power of the pause. And then next week, Pastor Phil will finish up with anchored in truth. And so, obviously, like I said, we're mixing it up this morning by us having a conversation. Just a reminder, it's actually in your Church Center app. All the resources some of the resources we're talking about and some of the resources we mentioned, and there's more on there. We put a bunch of other stuff that are on there, and you can follow the link. Matter of fact, you can scan the QR code on the back of your seats, I believe, to get the digital bulletin, and you'll see a link to all these resources. There's some great TED Talk videos there as well that it would be fascinating for you to just watch and soak in.
I'm glad that you said, we're not saying all this stuff is always bad, because obviously we're saying we got to be careful with the digital noise and the distractions. By the way, take out your phone and scan the QR code there. This is like anything, a tool. And a tool can be used well, or a tool can be used poorly. And I think that's one of the important things to remember, is that everything that sort of comes into our sphere, we're responsible to use wisely and to use for God's glory. So there's all kinds of ways, I think, that we can employ technology for good. But the problem is, technology is in many ways designed to sort of pull you in, and designed in a way that is not necessarily always healthy.
No, it wants to grab your attention and trap you in there, because that means a little bit more, quite honestly, money and for them, for advertisers, the spectacle makers, as we said. It's like, I love I think Dave Ramsey said it's amoral. It's like a brick. Social media is like a brick. I can build a house with it, or I can throw it through the window. So depending on how you use it, it can be a blessing or a curse.
Right.
So what we're going to do is we're going to ask some questions. So I'm going to ask some questions to Pastor Phil, and then he's going to turn around and ask me some questions. So are you ready?
I am ready
for your first question.
Yes.
So could you please reconcile the dichotomy of divine impassibility with the incarnational necessity of Christ's moments of stillness in the Gospels?
Yeah.
Take your time.
That's no. You're funny.
That's not really. Let me word it a different way.
Okay.
Where in the Bible do we see people being distracted?
That's a great question.
Okay. I thought the first one was a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. we were planning on doing some of this, so I did some research. It's funny. I was going to say before I answer your question.
Okay.
You know, Matt and I can have conversations, right?
Yes.
We can have conversations. Sometimes
Oh.
he'll pop into my office and he wants to ask me a quick question like, do we have any more toner for the printers? And then 3 hours later, we're done talking about all the different things that
Right.
happen spiritually or whatever. Do you remember when I first got hired here? Matt and I have been working together for 22 years. When I first got hired here, by the way, before social media, this is how old we are. When the church was first launched, there was no
Facebook, Twitter,
no Twitter,
X,
no
whatever.
texting. No.
Yeah.
We talked on a regular phone. I think it was attached to the wall even. But do you remember when we got talking and we talked so long on the phone
Yes.
and it was long distance? How many remember long distance?
You had paid, yeah. You weren't here yet, and you were still
I still lived in Tampa.
in Michigan or
Yeah.
Detroit or Tampa or somewhere, I don't know, another country. And yeah, we're like, hey,
We
we're
coming up with all kinds of ideas like we do, and we talked for so long that the phone bill ended up being like $450.
Yeah.
And we both got in trouble from the pastor at the time for
Yeah.
taking so much time. So here's where it brought us
Yeah.
now, to this great series.
By the way, did you end up paying any of that? Because I did.
No, I don't believe I did.
Oh.
All right. But I wanted to say it. This series is Matt's brainchild, and he's really done a good job. I really appreciate you putting the time and the effort into it, for sure. And super practical. And like I said last week too, like I'm so susceptible to this. You know what I mean? So
We're culprits completely.
Yeah. So I don't want you to think like, oh, you know, he does never have any distractions. I get pulled into the phone too. But when I was looking in the Bible, you know, there's no sort of apples to apples comparisons of the kind of distractions that we deal with. And I think there's a couple reasons. Well, obviously they didn't have the technology, you know, so in the first century, even if you go back into the Old Testament, besides for not having the technology available, most people really just worked almost all the time. That's why the Sabbath, and I know we're going
Right.
to talk about that in a moment, is so important. You know, just to live, just to survive back then, all of your time was spent trying to survive. So there was very little leisure time
Yeah.
as well. And I think that's one of the challenges for us is we do have a lot of leisure time and sometimes the wrong things come in. So when you look in the Bible, there's a couple of examples of that. The first one is Solomon. Now, Solomon was known as maybe the wisest man. He wrote the book of Proverbs, Song of Songs, and he was gifted from God to be smarter than basically everybody else, but he still fell into this mindset of distraction because he had too much leisure time. As the king, he sort of collected for himself everything. You know, he had too many wives, too many concubines. He had castles and palaces and horses and all kinds of things.
Lots of followers.
Yes, he was the first influencer. But these were distractions for him because he had too much time on his hands.
Right.
His father David was also a culprit, even though David, and I'm going to share some scriptures later where he actually understood how to pause, even he fell victim to it. You might be aware of the famous story of David and Bathsheba. That came about because if you look in 2 Samuel, it says very clearly, it says, in the springtime when the kings lead their armies into battle, next sentence, David is on the rooftop. And is an indication that he's not doing what he should be doing or what he's supposed to be doing. He has too much time on his hands. That leads him into this sinful relationship with Bathsheba. So those are sort of two examples. But I think the one that hits home most is the story of Mary and Martha. And I'm going to ask you guys to look at this with us. It's in the book of Luke, chapter 10. If you don't have a Bible with you this morning, there's some Bibles around underneath the seats in front of you, or if you're using an electronic version of the Bible, will be in the English Standard Version. And I'll give you just a moment to find it. You might be familiar with this story, but it's about, I think, the closest example of being distracted for the wrong reason. So I'm going to read at verse 38. And you guys follow along. It says, now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was, what's your Bible say? distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve all alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Now, a lot of times we kind of look at Martha and we go, oh, Martha, you just should have known better. But I think that had we been in that situation, I know this, if I was in that situation, I would have done the same thing because Jesus is here. There's stuff that has to be done. You know, that stuff has to be cooked. This stuff has to be moved. That has to be cleaned. We have guests coming in. And her sister is just sitting there doing, in her mind, nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And Jesus says, you're very distracted. And I think what's important is not what the distraction is, but what the distraction is distracting you from.
Right.
And for her that day, the distraction was from Jesus. And so I think when it comes to social media or whatever it is that could be distracting any one of us, could be money, could be reputation, it could be social media, it could be even something relatively healthy. Like Martha thought she was doing the right thing. But the truth is, if that distracts you from doing what Jesus says, the one thing that's necessary, and focusing on him, then it's a problem.
Yeah. Well, and as a staff, I think you said this beginning of the year. It was kind of our 2024. We have it written in several spots in the office. Don't let ministry get in the way of ministry.
Yeah.
And because sometimes when we're like, oh, I got to get this thing set up and done and ready and prepared and all this kind of stuff. And then we miss sometimes the opportunity to, oh, yeah, no, you want to talk. Yes, Mike, tell me about what's going on. I think that's a perfect example.
Amazing story. I'm glad I hadn't thought about sharing this until just now, but it's such a great story. 2 weeks ago, I was in the office and Madison, who is our social media intern, she came into my office. She said, I got a couple questions for you. And the first question she said was, I have a friend who's kind of going through something and she feels like she can't sort of forget her past sin and she knows that God's forgiven her, but she can't move past that sin. And we talked about that for a little bit, shared some scripture. And then she said, oh, and I also have an idea for social media because she comes up with social media ideas for the church. And she said, what if we dressed you up like a homeless person and you sat outside the church in disguise to see how the church would react to that.
Yeah.
And I think she saw that at a different church. And I said, oh, that's an interesting idea. We started talking about it. Now, we got done with that conversation. And 10 minutes later, a person showed up on the campus, a young man.
Yeah.
And we didn't know who he was, what he wanted. We went out there to talk to him. We had kids on campus from our school, so we're like, okay, let's be careful. Turns out it was a young man who was homeless. And the question that he had for us, he said, I just want to talk to a pastor. The question that he had is, how can I get over my past sin? It was the strangest situation, and I think a bit of a test.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, as we were talking with him, and we all kind of went out there and took a shift talking with him for a little while, and he was here for a few hours. We got back into the office and thought, well, we got nothing done. No. That's what we needed to do at that moment. So sometimes even the thing that's good can be distracting from the one thing that's necessary.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to dress up as a homeless person.
That's right. Thank you for that.
Check. So my next question for you is, where in the Bible do we see an example or the example of stillness? Since the power of the pause is about being still.
Yeah. So
where do we see there?
Well, there's a lot more opportunities in the Bible for this. You start to see it all over the place. A couple of examples. Daniel is a great example. Daniel was a very important figure in the Babylonian government. He was a Jewish boy who was taken over during the captivity, and he was, well regarded by the king at that moment. But Daniel would stop what he was doing, and according to his custom, 3 times a day, whatever he was doing, he would stop and he would pray. And I can imagine him being like right in the middle of some important council meeting and saying, stop guys, I have to go and pray.
Yeah.
And he would go and do that. So he was very intentional about taking a pause from his day. And then of course, David, though David was he sinned, he was a real person, he had struggles. He's also a great example because all through the Psalms, you see David talking about that. For example, in Psalm 37, he says, be still before the Lord, wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. And he was somebody who was, for a good portion of his life on the run, being hunted.
Right.
But even in those situations, he knew you have to stop and have a pause. But of course, the best example is Jesus. So Jesus, it looks like, was very intentional about waking up early in the morning to go away to pray. So for example, Mark chapter 1, verse 35, it says, very early in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went to a solitary place to pray. Luke 5, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So he would go where there was nobody else. Matthew 14, after he had dismissed them, he went on to the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. So for me, I think there's a couple of surprising things about this. Number one, Jesus is the Son of God. And yet he still was intentional about taking time to be alone and talk with God. Often he would choose prayer as a way to deal with pressure. Frequently there was thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people following him, wanting to be healed, wanting to hear a teaching, wanting to see a miracle, and he would intentionally leave and go pray. So I think he did a couple of things. He prioritized this pause. By doing it early in the morning, he's saying the first thing before anything happens, and I will tell you that's probably one of the best things you can do and one of the hardest things you can do. You say, first thing in the morning, I'm gonna get by myself. He used prayer, I think, as a part of the pause. And for me, that's challenging, and I don't know about for you, because as soon as you stop looking at a screen, reading something, thoughts come flooding in to your mind. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And really staying focused on the prayer. And then I think it's important, regardless of the circumstances, he still found a way to do that. It's sort of like if you're going to dedicate yourself to doing something on a regular basis, there's always going to be exceptions that pop up. Oh, we have visitors from out of town. Right. Oh, I've got that meeting that happens here. Oh, don't forget we have, XYZ. And before you know it, you haven't done it.
Derailed.
You're derailed, and then it's hard to get back on. Making it a priority and saying, no, this is the most important thing I have to do, and everything else needs to wait. So I think Jesus was the best example of taking a pause.
Yes, I agree.
Let's close in prayer.
So now we transition. You get to ask.
I get to ask you
me questions,
okay.
Unless you have anything else to fill in.
First
on that.
question that I have for you is: can you explain the significance of the aorist participle in Matthew chapter 25?
Oh, so you did the same thing. I see what we did. Yes, I can.
But you won't. Okay,
I won't. Not today.
What happens when we don't take a break from our digital connections? What are the effects?
Yeah. So let's talk about what's happening inside when we don't take a break from the digital noise. Imagine obviously going to a concert where the music is blaring and your ears are kind of ringing, and you leave that concert and it's still overwhelmingly loud. In the same way, everything is escalating. Everything is escalating, filling with the noise and excitement and stimulation from social media and all these technology things. And our minds never really get an opportunity to really, really turn down. And so just like our ears need to adjust, we also have to have our mind and our bodies. We need time to recalibrate. And there are three main areas that I wanted to share. These are some I'm giving some more stat kind of stuff, but three main areas that bear the brunt of constant connection is our nervous system, our brain, and our mental health. First, the nervous system is like the control center of our response to stress, right? the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight that we have. That's our fight or flight response. And our parasympathetic nervous system helps us calm down. But constant digital intake, notifications, texts, social media, the beeps, the advertising, that are you still watching notification at the end, it keeps us in a constant state of fight or flight mode. And so this keeps the sympathetic system in overdrive, pouring out stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And those are great for emergencies, but if you live in that all the time, it's not good.
Right.
It's like if you just left your car, sometimes you may start your car, rev it up a little bit to kind of whatever. You used to do that more often. Now you don't rev it up anymore, but okay, I'm good to go. If you just kept that on, it would eventually overheat. You just can't do that. Yeah. So nervous system. The second thing is the impact on the brain. Chronic stress from constant stimulation actually reshapes parts of your brain. And studies show that it shrinks the prefrontal cortex and the part of the brain, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for decision making, focus, self-control. So when we see all this digital noise, we start to lose that because it's starting to shrink. Meanwhile, the amygdala, which handles, I don't know where that's located, somewhere in that brain, it handles all the fear and anxiety. That gets bigger. And so it makes us more sensitive to stress, which means we end up being more reactive all the time. And we have less opportunity. Our system doesn't allow it, our brain doesn't allow us to start to calm and think thoughtful decisions. And researchers call that cognitive overload. So our brains weren't wired to process that much information without rest, without the calm. And so we need opportunities to break and rebuild our focus and think clearly. Memory, focus, even problem-solving skills all suffer when we're constantly reacting. Lastly, the increased anxiety and depression. I think we kind of have talked about that, and I think we all know that happens. A Pew Research survey found that 70% of U.S. teens view anxiety and depression as major problems among their peers. That's not earth-shattering. I think we would understand that. Approximately 46% of American adolescents aged 13 to 18 will suffer from a mental disorder. 21% will suffer from a disorder that is categorized as severe, and that meaning that's gonna basically interrupt their daily functioning in life. With digital dependence, we face the constant, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the constant comparison trap, the FOMO, fear of missing out. We compare ourselves to the endless highlight reel of other people's lives. Yeah. And so that all just leads to inadequacy, these thoughts of self-doubt. And so we see, it's no surprise that we're seeing record numbers of young people struggling with mental health. And these aren't just numbers that I'm saying. There are kids. There are friends. It's even ourselves. And so it's important to begin to break down these. Obviously, there's hope. There's a way out. And that begins with what we're talking about in taking the pause, being intentionally still. Moments where we unplug, let the nervous system reset itself, give our brains a break from the constant digital noise. And it allows us to hear not only our thoughts, right? Sometimes we actually need to hear our own thoughts, but more importantly, to hear God's voice amidst the crazy noise. In rest, we find strength. In stillness, we gain clarity. And when we step away from the digital world, we come back to the real world refreshed and ready. So that's, I think that's some of the effects of the digital connections that we have.
I want to add something to it. It's interesting. There was a book that I read, and I can't remember the exact title. It was something like Why Zebras Don't Have Anxiety. Something like that. And what was interesting about it is,
You got me. I want that book now.
yeah, it's something like that. Stephanie knows what it's called. Maybe she's going to look it up. But the idea was this zebra is designed to have sort of a fight or flight system. If you think of like all the different Animal Planet stuff you've ever watched, and there's the zebra, and he's calmly drinking water, at the lake or whatever, and there's a cheetah that's coming here, and all of a sudden, when the zebra becomes aware of the cheetah, he just like bursts into action and just runs as fast as he can. But once he outruns the cheetah, or if he outruns the cheetah, he goes back to being relaxed. Right. It's a design to cause him to survive, but then doesn't stay in that mode. And the point of this book is that as humans, we've kind of caused ourselves to stay. Oh goodness. Stephanie she's sending me the title. She's sending me the title of the book.
Hang on, let's get a text.
Wow. Thank you. Why zebras don't get ulcers.
That's close to what you said.
Yeah, well,
it had a zebra.
I remember the book.
It's black and white.
But to point out, well done. To point out the fact, and I think you said something like this, like your brain is designed. God designed your brain. And sometimes you do need a fight or flight response. Imagine, like you said, you're driving in your car and somebody veers into your lane. You almost don't even think about it.
Right.
You move, but you can't stay in that mode forever. No. And I think sometimes the phone does that. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it has your phone beep from the other side of the house and you get like a PTSD response, like somebody needs me.
Or on stage.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's not like I wonder who's here, and it's like something. And so I think the idea is the pause is the reset.
Yeah.
So that you're not living at that fight or flight moment forever. You have to be alone with your thoughts sometimes. Now, why do you think it's so difficult for us to be alone with our own thoughts?
Yeah. Well, have you ever been in a group discussion, maybe it's a Bible study or something like that, and somebody throws out a question and there's crickets. Yeah. And they're like this awkward silence. And usually someone who can't handle that in the group will start talking. They're like, I can't handle silence.
Yeah.
And we tend to fill the void, right? Whenever we're doing that. I think we have a little discomfort when we are left alone with our thoughts, because we wrestle with purpose and problems and people and pain, how to make friends, what are we doing next week, being accepted, you name it, whatever it may be. We have these things and we tend to fill all those moments of thinking about those things with distractions.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we don't want to think about those things. And so silence forces us to confront deeper issues in our life. And it's often discomfort of being alone when God speaks. Now, we want to show you this video and preface with this that it's a video of a comedian, Louis C.K. So we're not saying that he's the best of things, but he is communicating something very important here that I think is truth. And so we'd love to let you hear this from his perspective.
Let me say, it's not an endorsement of this comedian.
Correct.
And I think if we did find out, somebody said, well, he kind of got involved with some controversy that we're not sure about.
Right.
So,
and
but what he says,
there's lots of beeps. I added some more beeps because,
What he says is important and actually humorous.
Some parents really struggle with, like, all the other kids have the terrible things, so my kid has to. Yeah, let your kid go and be a better example to the kids. Just because the other stupid kids have phones doesn't mean that, my kid has to be stupid, otherwise she'll feel weird.
Right.
I think these things are toxic. Especially for kids. It's just this thing. It's bad. And they don't look at people when they talk to them, and they don't build empathy. Kids are mean, and it's because they're trying it out. They look at a kid and they go, you're fat. And then they see the kid's face scrunch up and they go, ooh, that doesn't feel good to make a person do that.
Right.
But they got to start with doing the mean thing. But when they write you're fat, then they just go, that was fun. I like that.
That tasted good.
So, yeah, exactly. The thing is, you need to build an ability to just be yourself and not be doing something. That's what the phones are taking away.
Yes.
Is the ability to just sit there like this. That's being a person, right?
Yes.
No one can, you gotta check. Because, underneath everything in your life, there's that thing, that empty, forever empty. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Just
I know what you're talking about.
knowledge that it's all for nothing and you're alone. It's down there. And sometimes when things clear away, you're not watching it, you're in your car and you start going, oh no, here it comes, that I'm alone, like it starts to visit on you. Just the sadness.
Yes.
Life is tremendously sad just by, being in it. And so you're driving and then you go, that's why we text and drive. I look around, pretty much 100% of people driving are texting.
Yes.
And they're killing, everybody's murdering each other with their cars.
Yes.
But people are willing to risk taking a life and ruining their own because they don't want to be alone for a second because it's so hard. I was in my car one time and a Bruce Springsteen song comes on and it made me really sad. It's like Jungle, what's the one, Jungle song?
Jungleland.
This one where he goes, and he sounds far away. It's like,
That's half of them.
Yeah, a lot of them.
No, he goes,
And it's really far away sounding.
Yeah.
Can you do it with the reverb? Can you do hey, hey? No, they're not doing it.
They're not trying to.
So,
Like that?
yeah. Except for it was Springsteen. If it was you doing that, I would have been like, what the is that in my radio? Springsteen.
I did it just the same as Bruce.
And I heard it, and it gave me kind of like a fall back to school depression feeling. It made me really sad.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, I'm getting sad. I got to get the phone and write hi to like 50 people. And then, somebody cool writes back, and then somebody not as cool writes after, and I'm like, oh, you, I'm not going to. I got somebody better. But,
Hey, how come you didn't answer my text?
Speaking of which, because he wrote first. That's right. So, anyway, I started to get that sad feeling, and I was reaching for the phone. Then I said, you know what? Don't. Just be sad. Just let the sadness just stand in the way of it, and let it hit you like a truck. And I let it come, and Bruce, and I just started to feel, oh my God. And I pulled over, and I just cried like I cried so much. And it was beautiful. It was like this beautiful, it's just this, sadness is poetic. You're lucky to live sad moments. And then I had happy feelings because when you let yourself feel sad,
yes,
your body has like antibodies. It has happiness that comes
rushing in
to meet the sadness. So I was grateful to feel sad, and then I met it with true, profound happiness. It was such a trip, and the thing is, because we don't want that first bit of sad, we push it away with like a little phone for the food, and you get a little kind of, you never feel completely sad or completely happy. You just feel kind of satisfied with your product.
Yes.
And then you die. So that's why I don't want to get a phone for my kids. That's what I'm
So, yeah, obviously lots of beeps there and stuff like that. But the truth, obviously, you can feel that. You know that. Because sometimes you're like, I have to let this in. I can't, the avoidance, the let me go to something else. I mean, that's why there's addictions in this world. And technology is one of those. Yeah. And we're finding that out now, like, oh no. And we just, let me just scroll a little bit more. Let me play a little bit more, whatever it is. And we dive to it.
I think the difference, obviously, for Louis C.K., who's obviously no theologian, is the pause for us is an opportunity to connect with the purpose.
Right.
Not just sadness,
yeah,
although sometimes that's a human reality, but connect with God.
Right.
right? The idea of taking a pause isn't just stopping, it's stopping to connect with God. And in order to connect with God, you have to shut everything else down. It would be like trying to have a conversation with every single TV and radio on in your house. You can't really hear.
Right.
So here's the question: how do we practice?
Well, let me finish a point on this because I want to talk about Elijah.
Okay.
But regarding that, Louis C.K., because you just said it, aren't you glad you have Christ? Like, how does everyone else manage this weight, right? And they're going, I don't know what to do with this God-sized void in your life, you know? And we go, okay, at least we have that answer. We're still going to have to feel the sadness at times, but we've got purpose and a plan.
Yeah.
So Elijah, who's prophet in the Old Testament, was called to confront Israel's idolatry and wicked leadership. And in 1 Kings, Elijah, feeling discouraged and afraid, goes and hides in a cave. And God tells him, he says, go stand on the mountain and witness my presence. And outside the cave, there was this powerful wind, an earthquake, and then a fire. But God wasn't in any of those events. Instead, Elijah heard God in a gentle whisper. God didn't shout. He didn't use the earthquake or fire. Instead, he whispered, teaching that his voice often comes when we need to stop and listen. And so God's voice is often quiet, reminding us to pause. And I can't tell you how many times we're trying to hide that, right? We're discouraged or we're afraid. And true encounters with God often happens in stillness. And we have to learn to wrestle through those times of uncomfortableness. We have to practice the power of pause. The more we hear him, the better we understand our own feelings and thoughts and what to do with them because we know him as the truth. So, yeah, the question you asked was, what ways can we practice the pause? So there are two parts to this. One is kind of things that we can do as adults, and then the other one I want to encourage parents to do. And I want to frame the answer to that question with talking about Sabbath. Sabbath is our God-given day of rest where we pause from work, we end up trusting in him, in his provisions, and we enjoy his peace and presence, right? That's Sabbath is there. It's modeled by God himself. He rested on the seventh day. We see that in Genesis. He commanded the Israelites to remember the Sabbath day in Exodus, and Jesus emphasized that Sabbath is about rest and renewal and a relationship with God in Mark. And I believe that God created the power of pause on our behalf. He did that for us. He said, you're going to need this. I almost think that, you kind of wonder, like, they didn't have all this technology, but he's thinking ahead going, oh, but you're going to need this. Literally, pause, and figuratively. And there's a quote here that it hit me from access.org, which is one of the resources that we have up there that you can take a look. The Sabbath isn't what we get to do when our work is finished. It rescues us from the tyranny of unfinished work. Yeah, that hit me. I was like, I started to text to people like, I'm admitting this has got me. And we have to be, for adults, we have to model this to our kids. And we have to model what's important, right? And we do that in the pause of our lives. While we're talking about digital technology, that also includes our schedule, our work, our busyness, our own digital intake. And so God didn't rest because he was tired. He rested because he delighted in what was good, in what he created.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I know this wasn't part of the questions, but you go backpacking and hiking.
Yeah.
And up in Appalachian, you like for days at a time, weeks at a time. So when you go hiking, what time do you usually go to bed at night?
But, well, there's a thing called hiker midnight, and that's about 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Because the sun went down, and there's nothing else to do.
There's nothing else to do. But you're also tired because the physical, emotional, spiritual work of the day took its toll on you physically, right?
For sure.
You did good work, and now you're satisfied, and sleep sets in, right? But I just think of my own life sometimes when at nighttime, we tend to we ramp up and we don't allow our nervous system and our brain to calm down. And so we ramp up and then we wonder why we can't sleep.
Yeah.
Teenagers, you wonder why you can't sleep. It is your digital device. You're ramping yourself up. If you didn't have that, it's like when we have a hurricane and all the power's out. Boy, we love life. Don't we? We enjoy that. It's like, oh, yes, I would love this. The problem is younger generations don't know that feeling of and it's time that we've got to teach them. We're actually less productive, but we're more tired. And that's because we're not doing physical things. What is the Sabbath saying no to? It's saying no to slave mentality. The Sabbath says no to anything that makes us a slave. What is Sabbath saying yes to? Being an image bearer. The Sabbath says yes to the way we're created with limits. We have limits as humans, created for relationships, being in his creation. So we're called to reflect God's peace and creativity, not our stress and busyness.
Can I make a point about Sabbath real
Yeah.
quick? A biblical thing that I always found interesting because when you take a good Sabbath, and a lot of times my Sabbath's Friday, I think your Sabbath's Friday, and I really struggle because people will text me, and I struggle to go like, sorry, I'm on Sabbath, I'll text you back, because then they'll be like, I'm so sorry, so sorry, you know. But it does communicate to the people around you that you take God's word and obedience seriously. Like it's a way to give God glory. And that's by design. If you think back when the Sabbath was instituted and when it was carried out, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses tells the Israelites that the Sabbath is a reminder to every other nation around them that, by the way, doesn't take a Sabbath, because at that time everyone works every day. It's a reminder of how good God is. This is the God that requests of you to actually rest in a time when there was no rest. And other nations around are like, I want to follow that God. That's the God who's designed us to actually have some downtime. And so it was actually like a way to share, for us, the gospel, but for them, the goodness of God.
Yeah. Well, and the question is, are you a slave seeker or an image bearer? I want to close with some practical things for parents. And I want to give you 4 things in a second here. In the book, Until the Street Lights Come On by Jenny Urick, it's a book that emphasizes that boredom is a vital component of childhood development. She explains that when children experience boredom, it stimulates their creativity, problem-solving abilities, and self-reliance. Instead of viewing boredom as a negative state, which we immediately eliminate with digital stuff, right? Urick encourages parents to recognize its benefits and allow children the space to navigate it independently. Boredom is where imagination begins. Without it, we miss out on certain creativity and problem-solving things. So I want to give you 4 things for the parents, and this could really be for all of us as well. I want to give you 4 ways to redeem boredom. Because I think what happens is our kid comes up and says, I'm bored. And immediately we just go, oh, here, right? It's very easy. So let's redeem boredom. Number 1 is to reframe boredom. And that's to simply shift the mindset. Understand that boredom is not bad, but rather an opportunity for growth. By reframing boredom as a chance for kids to develop imagination and resourcefulness. That's what happens. Second is resist screens. Limit the digital intake. Resist to the immediate urge to immediately go, here you go. Or even resist the urge to immediately put them in something. Team sports or organized sports is not bad. These are great things. You learn a lot of things about team, but sometimes we just say, oh, you're in football now, and you're in volleyball now, and you're doing that, like all these things, and we pack them in there. When they need time that they figure things out, not the coach or somebody telling them, you got to kick it this way, you got to do it this way. No, they need opportunity to figure life out in the woods. Like, what can I do with this barrel? Or how can I really build a good fort? Or will this tree limb hold me?
Right.
You know? Like, you're gonna learn that pretty soon, right? Instead of immediately solving the problem and handing a screen, give them time to explore their environment and interest. The 3, resource spaces. What that means is creating an enriching environment. Is what they call providing an open-ended materials, like art supplies, building blocks, outdoor spaces like a sandbox, a tire swing. Sounds simple, I know, but they're just open-ended things that you kind of, go create something with that. The resource can inspire children to obviously engage in self-directed play. They utilize their creativity to overcome their own boredom.
Yeah.
Instead of this being the pacifier, they're able to pacify themselves by using their brain and their activity and their movement. Matter of fact, what we're seeing is I say that here. So number 4 is to role model play, okay? And that's to model and encourage, obviously, outdoor play. Uric advocates for increased outdoor activities, highlighting their role in reducing reliance on digital technology. We in Fuse Kids and Freedom Christian Academy, I know the Stephanies would say this, our wives, they experience more kids, and we do too in Fuse, stumbling and falling out of chairs and not being able to balance. No joke. They're not able to do these things. Some of them are like, I've never climbed a tree. And I'm like, what? Get in that tree. And they're like, I don't know how to do that. They don't know how to jump. It sounds crazy, but it's true because they're not getting out there and getting time outside, which helps not only their mental well-being, but their physical well-being. So by adopting these strategies, parents can help you can help your children embrace boredom instead of run from it. Embrace it and reducing these digital distractions. The power of the pause isn't just about unplugging, but plugging into God's peace and purpose. And so I think that's one of the things that we can do with, making sure that we have practical things to pause.
Yeah. That's good. I'm going to call the band back as we close. You know what that reminded me of? This comedian that I saw. He had said, have you noticed that there's just not as many kids walking around with casts on? And he says, do you remember when you were a kid, you would walk into your 3rd grade classroom, it looked like a VA hospital. You had kids on crutches and casts and eye patches and things. I don't know if 100% of that's true.
Yeah,
but
so go break something today.
So go out there and get some movement going. Well, I do appreciate, Matt, the time and effort you put into this series. I love the practicality of it. I think it's really, really good. We'll conclude with the series next week. But let's just go ahead and close our, not the service, but close this teaching time with some prayer. Let's pray together.